Chapter 37 Tantalus Crater 31 October 2 o'clock p.m. The solitary wasp flew in slowly, a paralyzed caterpillar dangling between her legs. She began to fly back and forth in zigzags over her nests, then settled lower, searching for the mud chimney of her burrow. Within moments, she had registered that her chimney had been smashed. Her nest had been damaged and invaded. There was an intruder. Danny Manott wrapped himself around the rock, hiding under the plant, trying to make himself as rock-like or plant-like as possible. "You idiot," he whispered to Karen. He'd been left alone in the micro-world. The mother landed, killing the caterpillar. Vibrating her rings, she advanced to the entrance. At that moment, she caught the scent of her baby's death, leaking out of the hole. She began beating her rings furiously, the air filled with the thunder of her rings. She dropped the caterpillar, then charged into the hole head first. King heard a rumbling sound in the earth above, a buzz of wasp rings, a clatter and clash of a wasp's exoskeleton. "Danny," she called. "What's happening?" There was no answer. "Talk to me, Danny." The mother surged down into her nest, a toxic, armored bundle of maternal rage. Karen listened to the wasp coming. She crouched in the chamber at the foot of the vertical shaft, with Rick lying on the floor behind her. The sounds were frightening and informative. A sharp smell wafted into the room, an advance wave of the mother's fury. Karen got out of her diamond sharpener and began to frantically hone her machete. Zing, swoosh, zing. "Hang on, Rick," she muttered. She worked the sharpener over the steel, bringing the blade to an extreme edge. It would have to slice through massive bioplastic armor. Then she poised herself by the opening with the blade raised over her head. Come on," she muttered. The mother reached the bottom of the shaft. There was a pause. Then the wasp's head, huge, black and yellow, appeared in the opening, upside down. She swung the machete at the wasp's face with every ounce of her strength. The blade bounced off the wasp's eye, leaving a mark. The lady had armored eyes. The wasp thrust her head, still upside down, into the room, snapped her jaws around the machete, and tore the blade out of Karen's hands, dragging it back into the hole. Karen heard crunching metallic sounds. The wasp was cutting up her last weapon. The room shook. The wasp was pounding her rings against the tunnel walls, getting ready to charge. She heard the wasp gasping. She glanced over her shoulder, and her headlamp beam passed over Rick. He looked dead. And swinging her head around, she became aware of the little knife dangling from her neck. She'd sworn never to carry it in her pocket again. My knife. She thumbed the blade open, and yanked the cord off her neck. The wasp's head was in the room now, still upside down, and the jaws snapped at her. Karen dove down to the floor and slid her body underneath the wasp's upside-down head. The head was covered with bristles. She gripped the bristles. The head jerked up and down, battering her against the floor. The wasp could see her. A trio of little eyes stared at her from the top of the head. Karen clung to the head as it rotated and beat her against the tunnel, the jaws crossing and snapping. She was getting a terrible thrashing. Even so, in searching for a grip, she reached behind the wasp's head and managed to get her fingertips wedged in the occipital suture, the crack between the head capsule and the palmar, the first armored plate of the thorax. This was the back of the wasp's neck. There was a joint in the armor at that spot. Her fingertips felt soft tissue in the crack. The neck was so narrow that she was able to wrap her fingers entirely around the wasp's neck. She had gotten a stranglehold. Maybe she could choke the wasp. At that moment, the wasp jerked backward into the tunnel, dragging Karen along. Now she was jammed in the tunnel, being crushed by the wasp's head, which continued to hammer against her body. The wasp curled its body, and Karen realized it was trying to bring its abdomen forward and sting her. The wasp pushed her back into the room again and began twisting, trying to throw her off its neck. But she held her grip. Having located the neck joint, she let go of the neck with one hand, grabbed her knife, then slipped the tip of her knife into the crack. Then she quickly ran the knife blade around the neck, following the crack and sawing as she went. All the way around, the wasp's head fell off. It rolled on top of her, and she scrambled back into the room, followed by a spurt of blood. The mandible snapped twice and froze. The bodies exsanguinated fast, blood spewing out of the severed neck all over Karen. The wings of the headless body thumped against the walls in the tunnel, the wing beats weakening and slowing down until the corpse quieted and lay still. Karen pulled herself away and knelt by Rick and took his hand. She was shaking badly. "I did it." Out of the corner of his eyes, Rick saw movement behind her. He blinked his eyes and shouted in his mind, "Look out!" The master brain inside the severed head had lost contact with the 8 minor brains in the wasp's body, but those minor brains were still sending out messages to the rest of the body. The wasp's legs went into action, dragging the headless body into the room. The abdomen curled and thrust forward, and the stinger came out. A noise at her back made Karen whirl around. Just in time, she saw the stinger coming, and jumped aside as the abdomen slammed her into the wall. She struggled, trapped, as the sting raved past her face. She she saw the twin blades working against each other inches from her eyes. The sting pulps popped out and tapped her cheek and entered her mouth. But finally the stinger went still, lightly resting on Karen's collarbone. The blades bared. A dewdrop of poison swelled from the blades and hung there. She could see her face reflected in the droplet of wasp venom. She delicately extricated herself from under the sting, avoiding contact with the liquid in blades. Then she got down on her knees and wiped the dirt from Rick's face. "How are you doing, soldier?" He seemed completely paralyzed. Rick's face looked like a mask. Eyes moving, blinking, but no expression. The muscles in his face had gone AWOL, and he had peed his pants. At least he was breathing, and his heart was beating. The wasp venom was tricky stuff, she realized. It had disabled some of his nervous system, but not all of it. Was he trying to talk? She couldn't be sure. "Can you blink?" she asked. "If you blink your eyes, it means yes. If you don't blink, it means no. Can you understand me?" He blinked once. Yes. Then something trembled in his face. "Rick, is that a smile?" "Yes. Trying to." "That's a start. Does anything hurt?" "Yes." "What hurts?" "Never mind. I'm going to carry you." "Where that hurt?" He blinked. He didn't blink. "No." She lifted Rick under the arms and dragged him around the dead wasp, keeping their bodies away from the big droplet of venom that still hung from the wasp's stinger. As she dragged Rick, though, she could see how dire his condition was. He would never survive unless he could move his muscles. His nervous systems needed help. That fucking venom. The droplet of poison gleamed in her headlamp, suspended from the stinger. That venom had acted like a smart bomb, taking out only parts of his nervous system. Horrible poison. But so sophisticated too. Nature could do magic with chemistry that no human drug could accomplish. Rick needed help or he would die. Staring at the clear drop of poison, Karen got an idea. The venom that had paralyzed Rick might also help save him. She needed to collect it. She groped at her waist and found a water bottle suspended on a cord from her machete belt. She poured out the water, then held the open mouth of the bottle to the venom droplet and watched as the liquid dripped into the bottle. She screwed on the top. "Okay, I've got a plan, Rick. It's crazy, but it might work." He just stared at her. Jamming her knees against the walls of the shaft, Karen pushed him up the shaft ahead of her as she climbed. She felt like Superwoman. She never could have done this in the big world. It was a long climb, accomplished in stages, with rests and in between, and she was glad she was as strong as an ant. Finally, she arrived at the mouth of the nest. Danny Mannert had given up hope. He couldn't believe his eyes when Rick Hutter popped out of the hole, followed by a battered-looking Karen King. "I got him," she said fiercely, and hoisted him across her shoulders. She carried him across the sand and dropped him in the shade of the plant beside Danny. She knelt by Rick and studied him. Danny huddled nearby, crouching to keep out of the wind. "Can you stand up?" she asked Rick. He blinked once. "Yes. You want to try?" She helped him stand up. He swayed, tottering, and dropped to his knees, then sank and fell over. She showed him the canteen of wasp venom. "This might save you, Rick. No guarantees. What we need to do now," she looked at the line of towering bamboo across the open ground, "is get ourselves back into the forest." She was thinking of the death of that sniper, how the man had gone into a grand mal seizure from the spider venom. The man's death carried information that might save Rick. Chapter 38. Tantalus Base, 31 October, 2:30 p.m. The wind that blew across the ridgeline of Tantalus Crater. Karen King and Danny Manott walked along slowly, carrying Rick in a stretcher made from a space blanket. Karen wore the backpack, and the blowgun was slung across her back. They moved step by step, making their way painstakingly toward the wall of bamboo trees and the great boulder. Rick's breathing came hoarsely from the stretcher. "Put him down," Karen said to Danny. She examined Rick. His face was pale and drawn, and his lips were turning blue. He wasn't getting enough oxygen. What especially worried her was his breathing, ragged, irregular, insufficient. The wasp venom might have affected the breathing center in his brainstem. If his breathing shut down, he was finished. She opened his shirt and found a bruise on his chest. What was that? The bends coming on? Or just the result of being thrown around by the wasp? They had to get out of this open area. They were morsels for birds, food for another wasp. "How are you doing, Rick?" He moved his head slowly from side to side. "Not so good. Just don't fall asleep, okay? Please." Karen studied the bamboo forest ahead. "We just need to get under those plants." Rick, "It's not far now." She hoped, prayed, she'd find what she needed there. In the leaves, she heard a sigh. "How are you doing, Rick?" Silence. Rick had lost consciousness. She shook him. "Rick, wake up. It's me, Karen." His eyes opened and closed. He was becoming unresponsive. All right. Maybe she could make him angry. She had always been good at that. She slapped him in the face. "Hey, Rick." His eyes flew open. That had worked. "I nearly got myself killed dragging your sorry ass out of that hellhole. Don't you dare die on me now." "We might have to leave him," Danny said softly. She turned on Danny in fury. "Do not say that again." Finally, they got beneath the plants and put Rick down in the cool shade. Karen gave him a droplet of water to drink, holding the water in her cupped hands, and poured it into his mouth. She looked up at the leaves. She wasn't sure of the species of plant. That didn't matter. What mattered was whether any spiders lived on these leaves. There was a particular spider she wanted to find. She knelt by Rick and talked to him. "Rick," she said, "you need a swift kick in the pants." He smiled faintly. "What are you going to do?" Danny asked her. She didn't answer. She rooted around in the pack and removed a clean, empty plastic lab bottle. Then she started pacing around, looking up into the leaves. She grabbed the blowgun and the dot kit, and she ran into the deeper parts of the vegetation. "Where are you going?" Danny shouted. "You watch him, Danny. If you let anything happen to Rick, Karen." She ran off. She had spotted a flash of color under a leaf. Dayglow. Green, red, yellow. It might be what she was looking for. It was. She wanted to find a spider that wasn't very poisonous. All spiders used venom to kill their prey, generally insects, but spider venom varied a lot in its toxicity to humans and mammals generally. Black widow venom was among the worst. The bite of a black widow spider could make a horse drop dead. Yet other spiders seemed less toxic to humans. She stood under the spider now, looking up at it. It was small, with legs as transparent as glass, and a body splashed with colorful markings. The markings formed a pattern that looks like a human face, grinning with laughter. It looks like the face of a smiling clown. It was a happy face spider. Theridion grallator, one of the most common spiders in Hawaii, much studied by scientists, known to have essentially no effects when it bites a human. The happy face spider rested in a little cobweb, a tangle of threads strung randomly under the leaf. These spiders were very shy. They tended to flee at the first sign of trouble. "Don't run away on me," she whispered. She began to climb the stem of the plant. She shinnied up it at a distance, and then, getting herself seated on a leaf, she took out a dot from the kit and opened her canteen. The wasp venom had filled it almost to the neck. She dipped a dot in the venom, loaded the gun, and took aim. The spider backed away, staring at her. It appeared to be frightened. Yes, it was scared. It clenched itself down inside its little web. She knew the spider could hear her, and was forming a sonic image of her with the ears in its legs. It had probably never encountered a human and had no idea what Karen was. She blew. The dot lodged in the patterned back of the spider. The spider backed up its legs, flipping around, and it tried to run, but the venom acted swiftly, and within moments The spider stopped moving. Karen heard air whistling faintly in and out of the spider's lungs, and she saw its back rising and falling. Good. It was still breathing, and its heart was beating. That was important. The animal needed to have blood pressure in order to pump out venom. She climbed up to the web. She took a strand and shook it. Yay. The spider didn't move. Karen strung herself into the web and crawled across the threads, right up to the spider, reached out to one of the legs and flicked at a sensory here. Nothing happened. Lying on the web, she unscrewed the top of the empty lab jar and positioned it under the fangs. Using 2 fingers, she lifted a fang from its base, unfolding the fang from its sheath as she stared into the spider's eyes. How to get the venom flowing? The venom glands were located in the spider's forehead, behind its eyes. She made a fist and rapped on the spider's forehead. The spider stirred, and a few drops of liquid dribbled out of the fangs. She screwed the cap on. She hoped the spider would wake up no worse for its experience. She cut the web below her and fell to the ground. She bent over Rick. This spider venom. She held up the jar so that he could see it. Might give your nerves a jolt. It has excitotoxins in it. You understand? He looked at her, blinked once. Yes, I understand. Excitotoxins. They'll make your nerves fire. But there's a real danger. I don't know anything about this venom. I can't control the dose. This stuff could kill cells in your body. It could start digesting you. In her mind's eye, she saw the sniper's body going through that digestive meltdown. She took his hand in hers and squeezed it. I'm afraid, Rick. He squeezed her hands back. She said, You want it? He blinked. Yes. She removed a blow dart from the case. A clean one. No cure on it. She dipped the tip of the dart into the spider's venom. The tip came up wet, barely covered with a minuscule amount of the liquid. She held it in front of him, where he could see it. Are you sure? Yes. She laid the point across his forearm. She caused the point in his skin, over a vein, and pushed it in. Not too deep. Then she gripped his hand and leaned over him. Rick. For a few moments, nothing happened. She was beginning to wonder if she had given him enough. But then he gasped. His breathing sped up. She touched his neck and felt his pulse racing. The venom was hitting him hard. There was an explosive sound. Rick gasped and dragged air into his lungs. Then he went into a seizure. His gaze flew around wildly, and he strained upward against her, eyes staring, body trembling. She lay across him, holding his arms down, but afraid to press on him too hard. He gasped, taking huge lungfuls, hyperventilating as his spine arced. She threw her weight on him, trying to pin him down, fearful that he would hurt himself. He groaned, and then his hand ripped out and fastened around her neck. He gripped her throat, his fingers squeezing, closing her throat off. He was trying to strangle her. He hated her that much. But then his fingers relaxed. His grip softened. He released her throat. He ran his hand over her shoulder. The touch became a caress. His hands worked up the side of her neck and under her ear, passed lightly over her skin, and his fingers opened and ran through her hair. Now she was kissing him, and the great thing was that he was kissing her back. She broke off, finally. "Does it hurt, Rick?" "Hurts like hell," he croaked. "I could get to like it." She helped him sit up. He was dizzy and almost toppled over, but she held him, keeping her arms around him, talking softly to him, telling him everything would be all right. "You saved my life, Rick. You saved my life." Jenny sat there, watching Rick and Karen make up to each other, feeling extremely uncomfortable. In his opinion, this kind of stuff did not advance the effort to get back to Nanogen. He needed a doctor as soon as possible. He glanced down at his arm and almost threw up. The grubs seemed fatter than ever. In a little while, Rick was able to stand. They began to walk. They went into the bamboo forest, where stalks of bamboo soared like redwoods. They made their way through it and broke out onto a stunning view. They were facing the great boulder on the lip of Tantalus Crater and looking down into the crater. The crater extended beneath them, a basin stuffed with rainforest rimmed by bare ground and patches of stunted, wind-racked trees. All around the crater, peaks of the Kuala Pali fingered into boiling clouds, and the wind pummeled the scene. At the foot of the great boulder lay Tantalus Base. The base would have been virtually unnoticeable to a person of normal size. There was an aircraft runway about 3 feet long. At least Karen felt pretty sure it was a runway. She could see a dashed line and taxi markings. Beside the runway stood a cluster of miniature buildings made of concrete. The largest building seemed to be an aircraft hangar. The other buildings were smaller and looked like bomb shelters. The buildings were embedded partway in the soil and were lightly covered with dead leaves and plant debris, so they blended into the microterrain. Karen stopped. "Wow, Rick," she said. "We made it." He turned his head and smiled, and looked at her. She rubbed his hands, his arms, to get the circulation going. Your hands feel warmer? You're getting better, I think. They didn't want to draw attention to themselves, because they didn't know what to expect from the inhabitants of the base. Nitrogen employees who might well be following orders from Ving Drake. They decided to watch the base for a time, looking for activity. They lay down under a mamaki plant. The great boulder loomed above, like a mountain. There was no activity on the runway. The place seemed deserted. The runway was strewn with stones, dried mud, plant debris. A cone of dirt had risen next to it, an ant's nest. An ant trail extended across the runway and headed downslope toward the bottom of the crater. It doesn't look good, Denny Mannett whispered. Karen's heart fell. If no microhumans lived here, then there wouldn't be any shuttle to Nanogen, and no chance of help. This place hadn't been tended to. It had been overrun by ants, but there might be airplanes. They walked slowly down the hillside and went into the hangar. There were tie-downs for aircraft, but no planes. While Rick sat and rested with Danny, Karen explored the base. She found a room that she guessed had once held mechanical parts and supplies, but had been emptied out, leaving bent metal pins and bolts protruding from the walls and floor. She went into another room, empty. The next room contained living quarters. It had been flooded by rain and was half filled with mud. There was no sign of human life anywhere. Tantalus Base had been abandoned. There was no sign of a road to Honolulu either. No shuttle truck. No airplanes. Only the trade wind endlessly worrying the ground and whistling through the empty halls of Tantalus. They emerged from the complex and sat by the runway, looking down into the crater. They could see the city too, through the gap in the crater's wall, and beyond the city the Pacific Ocean ran off into blue. Nanogen was miles away from this crater, and there was no way home. Danny Mannett lay in the rubble, holding his arm. He began to cry. His sobs echoed off the hangar and drifted into the sky shot with grey rolling clouds and wind. Karen watched an ant hurry across the runway, carrying a seed. She turned her gaze up to the great boulder, and then past it to the horizon line and the clouds. Something moved against the sky near the boulder, and she suddenly realized it was the figure of a man. Chapter 39, Tantalus Base, 31 October, 5 o'clock p.m. How long the man had been standing there, Karen couldn't say. Possibly he had been watching them the entire time they'd explored the base. She saw his hair flash in the breeze. Long, right. He wore armor of some kind, but she couldn't tell what it was made of. His eyes looked hard and cold, even at that distance. He lifted up an object, and she saw it was a gas rifle. "Down!" Kevin shouted, grabbing Rick. He fired. There was a hiss and a glint of steel, ripped past them and buried itself in the ground somewhere beyond, and exploded with a thump. Karen began crawling, dragging Rick behind her, but there was nowhere to hide. Another sniper. Drake had found them. The man's voice came to them over the wind. That was a warning. "Stand up and show me your hands. If you have weapons, drop them in front of you." They obeyed him. Kevin held up the blowgun so he could see it and dropped it on the ground. She placed the container of darts next to it. "Put your hands on their head." Karen obeyed and called out, "We have 2 injured. We need help." He didn't answer. He moved towards them, keeping the gun raised. As he got closer, they saw that he was an older man, with a weather-beaten face bronzed by the sun, and deep-set blue eyes. He clearly had muscles, and he looked physically powerful. How old was he? He could have been anywhere from 50 to 80, it seemed. His armor had been carved from the hard parts of a beetle. A scar ran across his forehead and wandered down his neck and ran under the breastplate of his armor. He studied them, searching their faces. The man's eyes darted away, flicking around. Ken realized he was keeping alert for predators. He gestured at them with the gun. "Your names." Karen gave their names and added, "Who are you?" He ignored that. "My arm," Jenny began, and fell silent as the man pointed the gun at his face. Karen added, "We need medical treatment." The man just stared. He poked at the blowgun with his foot. "Interesting," he said. He picked it up, then examined a dart and sniffed it. "Poisoned," he said. She nodded. "Where are your guns?" "We lost our only gun, a bird attack." "Finn Drake sent you?" He interrupted. "Why?" Karen began to explain. "No, Drake tried to kill us." The man cut her off. "This is one of Drake's tricks." Karen said, "You have to take our word." "Where did you come from?" "The Arboretum." "And you made it up here?" "That's impossible." Karen walked up to him and pushed his gun aside. "Give me back my weapon." The man's eyes widened, maybe in surprise, maybe in anger. After a pause, he pointed his gun at the ground and broke open the firing chamber. A smile creased his face, exposing right teeth. "Somehow," he said, "you impress me." He handed her back the blowgun. "Welcome to Tantalus." "My name is Ben Walk. I'm the inventor of the tensor generator." Karen eyed him. "How did you end up here?" "Castaway by chance, a hermit by choice," he replied. Ben Walk lived in a whirlwind of caves near the Great Boulder, about 6 feet above Tantalus Base. He led them upslope toward the great boulder, and he helped Rick along. The cave entrance was a hole in the soil at the foot of the boulder, with a tunnel that ran horizontally inward, like the entrance to a mine. They had advanced through the tunnel, while the light grew dim. After some distance, they arrived at a door carved from wood. It was shut and latched with an iron hook. Rook opened the door, and they went through it into a pitch-black tunnel. He threw a switch, and a line of LED lights came on in the ceiling of the tunnel, trending inward. "Welcome to Rook's Redoubt," he said. "As I call my little place." He closed the door behind them and slammed home an iron pin. "Is to keep out centipedes." He walked ahead with a lanky, tough stride. The tunnel went around a bend and sloped downward, plunging deeper into the mountain. It turned left and right, and they passed side tunnels, going off into darkness. "This is an empty rat warren," Rook explained. Trick's people deemed the rats a threat to the humans at Tantalus Base, so they poisoned the rats and closed off the nest. I reopened the tunnels and moved in. At intervals on the ceiling, LED lights cast a blue glow. "Where does the power come from?" Ken asked him. "Solar panel, up in a tree. The wire runs down here to a battery pack. It took me 3 weeks to drag the damn batteries over from Tantalus Base, even with the help of a hexapod walker. Drake has no idea what treasures his people left behind when they abandoned Tantalus. He thinks I'm dead." "What's your relationship with Drake?" Ken asked him. "Hatred." "What happened?" "All in good time." Ben Rook was a mysterious character. How had he ended up here? How had he avoided death from the bends? Rick tested his limbs, rubbed his arms. He was covered with bruises. He could see them in the light. At last he could move. He wondered how much time he, Karen, and Denny had before the bends started to affect them, make them sick. How long had they been in the micro world? It seemed like ages. But actually it had been only 3 days. He reminded himself, the symptoms start on day 3 or day 4. They arrived at another heavy wooden door. The doors functioned like the bulkhead doors in a ship, sealing off parts of the warren from other parts. Rook barred the door behind them, explaining that you couldn't be too careful with some of the predators that lived around here. He threw a switch, and the lights came on, revealing a hall with a high ceiling, stocked with furniture, shelves of books, laboratory equipment, and supplies of all kinds. It was a living area. "Home sweet home," he said. He began taking off his armor, hanging it in a storage space. Side passages went off into additional rooms, and they could see electronic equipment in one room. There was a desk with a computer sitting on it, several chairs made of twigs and woven grass. A circular fireplace hearth occupied the center of the hall. A rack near the fireplace held strips of smoked insect meat. Rourke had also laid in supplies of dried fruit, edible seeds, and chunks of dry taro root. Rourke's bed was the shell of a candle nut, packed with soft, shredded bark. A tall pile of cut-up candle nuts sat heaped against one wall. Ben Rourke carried several of the oily pieces of nut meat to the fireplace, and he lit the fire using a gas torch. The fire caught, throwing light and warmth through the room, and the smoke went up through a hole in the ceiling. Ben Rourke seemed to be a jack of all trades, clearly a brilliant man who knew a lot about many things. He seemed happy in his fortress. He seemed to have found a life he enjoyed. They wondered about his story. How had he ended up here? Why did he hate Finn Drake? What had Drake done to him? Karen and Rick both glanced at their hands and arms and noticed the bruises there. It would be a good idea to persuade Rourke they needed to leave for Nanjing soon, or to learn from him how he had beaten the Bens. The first order of business, however, was for Rourke to examine Rick and Danny and tend to their medical needs. Rourke started with Rick. He rubbed Rick's limbs, stared into his eyes, and asked questions. He got out a small chest and opened it. It was a medical chest, rather like the kind that sea captains took with them on long voyages. The chest contained a number of items, including forceps, scissors, sterile compresses, a very long scalpel, a bone saw, a bottle of iodine, and a bottle of Jack Daniels. Rourke examined the puncture wound under Rick's arm, where the wasp stinger had gone in. He doused the wound with iodine, which made Rick jump, and he said it would heal. He added, "You guys need a bath." "We've been in the micro-world for 3 days, Karen said. 3 days, Rourke said, thoughtfully. "Actually, you've been here longer than that. I suppose you've noticed the time compression." "What do you mean?" Rick asked. "Time moves faster for us here. Your bodies are running faster. Your hearts are beating like a hummingbird's." "We had to sleep during the day," Karen remarked. "Of course you did. And your time is running out. The bends are already affecting you. I can see it. The crush will come soon. The bruising, the pain in the joints, the nosebleed, the end." Ken asked Rourke, "How did you avoid the bends?" "I didn't. I damn near died from them. But I found a way to make it through. Maybe some people can survive them." "What did you do?" Rick asked. "Right now we have to deal with these fellows." He turned his attention to Danny. Danny had seated himself in a chair near the fire. The chair was made of rica woven from fern hairs and tiny twigs. Yet it was massive and quite comfortable. He stretched out in it, cradling his arm. The sleeve had torn off completely, and the larvae under the skin made the arm bulge in lumps. Benwick studied Danny's arm, poking it gently. It was likely a parasitic wasp that egged you. She mistook your arm for a caterpillar. Am I going to die? Of course. Danny opened his mouth with a frightened look, but Rook added, When is the only question. If you don't want to die right now, that arm has to come off. He drew out a long scalpel and handed Danny the bottle of Jack Daniels. Anesthetic. Start drinking while I boil their tools. No. If you don't get that arm off, those grubs could migrate. To where? Your brain. Rourke held up the bone saw and touched its teeth. Danny leaped out of the chair and stepped backwards, holding the bottle in front of him like a club. Stay away from me. Don't spill that whiskey. I don't have much left. You're not a doctor. He took a glug from the bottle. I want a real doctor. He wiped his mouth and coughed. You're not going anywhere right now, Mr. Minot, Rourke said, replacing his instruments in the chest. Night is coming. At night, their eyes stay underground. Chapter 40. Rourke's Redoubt. 31 October, 7 o'clock p.m. Ben Rourke loaded more chunks of candle nuts on the fire and swung a metal cauldron over it. The cauldron was suspended on a hook and a hinged iron bar rooted in the floor. Pieces of metal he scavenged from Tantalus base. The water, a few teaspoons worth, came to a boil almost instantly. Rourke dropped a smaller bucket into the cauldron and carried a portion of the hot water over to a wooden tub, which sat in a niche in the wall. It was a bathtub in a private space. He added some cold water to the hot water, taking it from a gravity-fed water tank. Rick soaked in the water. The venom was still in his system, making him feel stiff, his limbs unresponsive, and he felt a little dizzy too. There was a lump of soap, crude and soft. It was medieval soap. Rourke had likely made it from ashes and the fat of some insect. It felt great to wash his body after crawling around for 3 days in the muck. But he couldn't help noticing the dark shadows that had spread over his arms and on his lower legs. He tried to tell himself these were bruises he'd gotten from his encounter with the wasp. He felt strange, but it had to be the venom. Danny refused a bath, afraid that the water might somehow stimulate the grubs. He sat in the chair, drinking from Rourke's bottle of whiskey and staring at the fire. Karen luxuriated next in the tub of hot water. It felt so incredible to get clean. She washed her clothes and hung them to dry, then wrapped herself in a robe that Rourke loaned her, and sat by the fire. Feeling refreshed, Rick wore a pair of Rourke's pants and a work shirt. The clothes were rough-hewn, but they were comfortable and clean. Rourke, meanwhile, cooked dinner for his guest. He got a pot of water boiling and added smoked insect meat, shreds of root vegetable, some chunks of leafy greens, and salt. The stew cooked rapidly, filling the hall with a savory smell. Rourke's insect and vegetable stew really was delicious, and it brought their strength back fast. They sat in Rourke's strange chairs near the fire, and they heard his story. Ben Rourke had been a physicist and system design engineer specializing in the most powerful magnetic fields. He had come across the data from the old Army experiments in Huntsville and had decided to explore the method of shrinking matter in a tensor field. He had solved some of the seemingly impossible equations of turbulence in these fields. Van Drake had learned of Rourke's work and had hired him as one of the founding engineers at Nanogen. Working with other Nanogen engineers, he had built the tensor generator out of modified but standard industrial equipment, purchased largely in Asia. Drake had raised huge amounts of capital from the Davros Consortium. Drake had a magic touch, a way of making it all seem exciting and sure to lead to enormous wealth. Ben Rourke had volunteered himself as the first human to be passed through the tensor generator. He had suspected it would be dangerous, and felt that he should be the first to take the risk. Living organisms were complicated and fragile. Animals that had been shrunk in the generator had frequently died, usually by exsanguination, by bleeding to death. Drake discounted the risk, Rourke said. He claimed there would be no problem. Rourke had only stayed in a shrunken size for a few hours before he was returned to normal size. As more people were shrunk in the generator, and as they remained small for longer periods of time, they began feeling ill, bruising easily, experiencing mysterious bleeding. They were quickly returned to normal size and examined. The studies showed unexplained degradation of the blood's ability to form clots. Meanwhile, Nanogen, swimming in investors' money, raced ahead with exploration of the micro world. The company decided to concentrate on exploring Tantalus Crater first. The crater had extremely high biodiversity and offered riches of chemistry and biological compounds. Tantalus Base was constructed in modules. We built each module as a scale model at a 1:10 ratio, and the modules were then shrunk in the generator to make them the right size for microhumans. Stocked with supplies and equipment, the modules were placed at Tantalus Crater. At first, the field teams were allowed to stay at Tantalus Base for no longer than 36 hours, after which they were returned to Nanogen and restored to normal size. Then Nanogen installed the supply stations in the Waipaka Arboretum down in the valley and began staffing them with people. It was difficult to operate the digging robots and to collect samples when the teams had to be rotated in and out so quickly. Vin Drake wanted to keep people longer in the microworld, despite the risks. Drake asked Rourke if he would agree to a longer stay at Tantalus as a test, to see if the human body could adjust to the microworld over time. I had faith in Vin, and I had faith in my invention, Rourke said. Nanogen patented my design, with money for me, if it succeeded. So I was willing to accept the risks of a longer stay in order to move Nanogen forward. Ben Rourke had offered to lead a team of volunteers who would attempt a 1-week stay at Tantalus. Since I had designed the tensor generator, I thought I should be the first person to try a longer stay. Take the risk myself. Rourke was joined by 2 other Nanogen volunteers, and an engineer named Fabio Fazzetti, and a medical doctor named Amanda Carrels, who would monitor the other 2 for medical changes. And so they had been shrunk in the generator and placed at Tantalus base. Things went well at first, Rourke said. We did experiments, we tested the equipment at the base, we stayed in regular contact with Nanogen through a special communication system, a video link with an audio frequency shifter, so that we could talk with big people. He indicated a wooden door in the living room. The door stood open, and beyond it they could see electronic equipment and a video screen. That's the video link. I moved it here from Tantalus base. Maybe someday Drake won't be in charge of Nanogen, and then I can call home. But as long as Vin Drake is running things, I don't use the system. Drake thinks I'm dead. It would be a fatal mistake to let Drake know I exist. After a few days at the base, all 3 volunteers began to develop symptoms of microburns. We developed bruises on our arms and legs. Then Falzetti got really sick. Dr. Corrals found he had developed internal hemorrhages. So she asked for an evacuation of Falzetti. Fabio Falzetti needed to be hospitalized immediately, or he would die. That was when Drake told us it wasn't possible to evacuate Falzetti. He said the generator had broken down, Rourke said. He claimed he was trying to get the generator fixed. Ben Rourke knew more about the tensor generator than anyone else. He began directing repair efforts from the microworld using the video link, while teams of engineers at the Nanogen headquarters followed his instructions. But somehow the machine couldn't be fixed. It kept breaking down, and then Falzetti died, despite Dr. Amanda Carroll's best efforts to save him. I think Drake had sabotaged the generator, Ben Rourke said. Why? Karen asked. We were guinea pigs, Rourke said. Drake wanted to have medical data on us all, the way up to the point of death. Next, Dr. Carrolls herself had fallen ill. Ben Rourke had cared for her, all the while begging for help on the video link. I finally realized we were never going to get help. Vin Drake was determined to see his vile experiment through to the end. the death of us to the death of all of us. He wanted to gain knowledge of the bends, but it was like a Nazi survival experiment. I tried to tell others Neogen staff on the video link, but nobody would believe me. I also think Drake enjoyed watching us die. The man takes pleasure in watching people suffer. It's as if when people are shrunk to micro size, Drake forgets they are still human. Nobody could believe that Drake would do this. People like Vincent Drake operate outside the bounds of normal morality. Their evil can become invisible to normal people, because normal people can't believe anyone would commit such evil. A psychopath can go on for years without being recognized as long as he's a good actor, Rook said. King asked Rook if he thought Drake was working alone. Does he have accomplices? She asked. There are people at Neogen who suspect the truth about Drake, Rook said. The Project Omicron people must know something. What's that? Project Omicron is the dark part of Neogen. The dark part? Neogen does classified research for the U.S. government. That's Project Omicron. What does Omicron do? Omicron deals with weapons somehow, Rook said, but that's all I know. So how do you know about it? Employee gossip is it's unavoidable. He smiled and stroked his chin, and got up and went over to the pile of candle nuts. He took a big piece and carried it over to the fire. The fire flared up. For a hermit, the man seemed kind of lonely, Karen thought. She stared at the fire and found herself thinking about her life back east. She had been living like a hermit herself in a cramped, seedy apartment in Somerville, spending long hours in the lab. All-nighters had become a regular thing. She didn't have any close friends, didn't go out on dates, didn't even go to the movies by herself. She had sacrificed a normal life in order to get a PhD and become a scientist. It had been more than a year since she'd slept with a man. Men seemed afraid of her, with her spiders, her temper, her drive in the lab. She knew she had a hot temper. Maybe it was just the way she was. Maybe she would be happier alone, the way Ben Rook liked being a hermit. Right now, her life in Cambridge seemed in another universe. Almost. What if I wanted to stay in the micro world, Ben? Do you think I could survive? There was a long silence. Rick Hutter stared at her. Rook got up and threw another piece on the fire and said, "Why would you want to stay here, Miss King?" King gazed into the fire. "It's dangerous here, but it's so beautiful. I've seen things I never dreamed of." Rook got up and helped himself to more stew, and went back to his chair and blew on the stew to cool it. After a while he said, "There is a Zen saying that a wise man can live comfortably in hell. It isn't so bad here, actually. You just need to learn some extra skills. Karen was watching the smoke go up, through the hole in the ceiling. She wondered where it went. She realized that Rook must have dug the chimney himself. What a lot of work just to have a fire. What would it be like trying to survive in the micro world? Ben had done it. Could she? Rick turned to Karen. Just a reminder, our time is running out. Rick was right. Ben, Karen said, we need to get back to Nanogen. He leaned back, looking at them through narrowed eyes. I've been wondering if I can trust you. You can, Ben. I hope so. Come along and we'll see about getting you home. Do you have any iron on your bodies? He made Karen leave her knife behind. The living room had an alcove at the end of a short tunnel, closed off by a door. Rourke flung open the door. Behind it, a huge disc of gray, shiny metal lay flat on the floor, with a hole in the center, like a donut. It's a neodymium magnet. 2,000 Gauss, he explained. Super strong field. After Farzetti and Carol died, I got sick. But I had a hypothesis that a strong magnetic field could stabilize the dimensional fluctuations that cause certain enzymatic reactions in the body to go wrong, like blood clotting. So I put myself inside the magnetic field and stayed there for 2 weeks. I was sick as hell, nearly died. But I came out of it all right. Now I think I'm immune to microbends. So if we stayed inside this magnet, we might survive, Rick asked. Might, Rourke emphasized. I'd rather get into the generator, Rick said. Of course. That's why I'm going to show you the secret of Tantalus, Rourke said. He led them out of the magnet room, down a long tunnel, through a bend, and up a sloping tunnel. They followed him, wondering where he was taking them. Benwick seemed to enjoy mysterious revelations. They entered a wide, long chamber, sunk in shadow, and filled with unidentifiable shapes. Drake threw a switch, and a line of LEDs blinked on. Parked on the floor stood 3 airplanes. The room was an underground hangar. Wide hangar doors remained closed over the mouth of the cave. Oh my gosh, Karen said. The airplanes sported an open cockpit, stubby swept-back wings, twin tails, and a propeller at the rear of the aircraft. They stood on retractable wheels. They were broken, so Drake's people just left them here. I fixed them up. Added scavenged parts. I've flown all over these mountains with them. He slapped the cockpit of one of the planes. Equipped them with weapons too. Where? I don't see any machine guns, Wick said, inspecting the wings. Rook reached into the cockpit and pulled out a machete. Kind of medieval, but it's the best I could do. He stuffed the machete back into the cockpit. Could we fly them to Nanogen? Karen asked. It's a very long shot, he explained. That the top speed of a microplane was 7 miles an hour. The trade winds average 15 miles an hour across Oahu. If you try to fly into the wind, you'll go backward. If you get the wind at your back, you may get across Pearl Harbor, or maybe not. It also depends on whether I decide to let you have my planes. Those are solo-seaters. They carry only one person. There's 3 of you, and there's 3 planes. That doesn't leave an airplane for me now, does it? Dr. Rourke, I would pay you a very large sum of money for one of your planes, Denny said. I inherited a trust fund. It would be yours. I have no need for money, Mr. Minot. Well, what would work for you? To see you bring down Vincent Drake. If you can do that, you can have my planes. Absolutely, we'll get Mr. Drake, Danny said. Karen remained silent. Wicks glanced at her. What was going on with her? Then he asked Rourke how Rourke would survive if he didn't have a plane. I'll build another one, Rourke said. Shrugging off the question, I collected a lot of spare parts. Then Rourke took charge. He had them sit in the cockpits, and he explained the controls. It's very simple. Everything's computer controlled. This is the stick. If you make a mistake, the computer corrects your actions. There's a radio. Here's the headset. They could talk to each other once they had gotten aloft. But there was no radar or navigation instrumentation. How would they find Nanogen? Kalikimaki Industrial Park should be obvious from the air. It's a group of warehouses on the Farrington Highway. He gave them a course heading. Okay, Rick said. So we managed to get into Nanogen. Then what? There will be security bots guarding the tensor core. Security bots? Flying microbots. However, I don't think you'll have a problem. You're too small to register on the bot's sensors. They won't see you. You can fly past the bots without waking them up. There's a way to operate the generator from the micro side. If you're very small, I designed the control myself. The control is located in the floor of the room underneath a hatch. The hatch is in the center of hexagon 3. It's marked with a white circle. You should see the white circle from the air. Is the control complicated? No. Just throw open the hatch and hit the red emergency button. You'll get supersized. He stopped talking and was staring at Rick at his arm. Rick had been leaning against a plane. His sleeve rolled up. Rick stared at the bruises, lengthening up Rick's arm. You're starting to crash, he said. Crash? Rick thought he meant the plane. Once the bleeding starts, you're finished. Let's get you into the magnet, Rourke said to him sharply. You're hours from a crash. Karen looked at her arms. They weren't in such a great shape either. It was going to be a race against time. Wait for dawn, and hope nobody started bleeding by then. Benwick advised them to sleep inside the magnet. He couldn't guarantee anything, but the magnetic field might delay the onset of symptoms. The magnet room had a fireplace in it too, and Rourke held in pieces of candle nut and started a fire. Karen and Rick climbed into the hole in the donut of the magnet, wrapped in blankets, and tried to settle down for the night. Neither of them felt terribly relaxed. Yet they were so incredibly tired. Time ran more swiftly in the micro world, and a day's rest could not come too soon. Danny Manat refused to sleep in the magnet. He said he would prefer to sleep in the main hall, where he settled into one of Rourke's chairs and wrapped himself in a blanket. Rourke threw another piece of nut on the fire and stood up. "I'm going to the hangar to get the planes ready. You will need to launch at first light." Rourke went off down the tunnels into the hangar. He would service the microplanes, test the instruments, and top off their electric charges, readying them for takeoff the moment daylight glimmered. Danny Mart found himself alone in the hall, curled up in the chair. He couldn't possibly sleep. He drank the last of the Jack Daniels and tossed the bottle away. His arm was stirring, moving on its own, the skin bulging and making crackling noises. He lifted the blanket and looked, and he could see the grubs twitching. He couldn't stand it. He began to cry. Maybe it was the alcohol, maybe the terrible state of his arm. Maybe it was his general situation. But he lost it. He wept and looked down the hall where Rourke had gone. How long would Rourke be gone? And that was when his arm came apart. There was a cracking sound, a sound like paper tearing. He didn't feel anything, but he looked down at the noise and saw the head of a grub pushing out through a widening split in the skin of his arm. It had a glistening head. It was huge, and it was squirming, waving its head around, lengthening as it struggled out. "Oh God, it's hatching," he whispered. The larva began to do something strange and horrible. It spat liquid from its mouth, stringy, thin drools. No, actually, it was thread. It was silk. The larva, still partway inside his arm, and more than halfway out, began to spin silk around itself. Rapidly waving its head around, it flung silk threads around its body, building up a covering of silk around itself. Even while its rear end stayed rooted in Danny's arm. What was it doing? It wasn't going to hatch. It was just going on to another phase. It was turning into a cocoon, but it refused to leave his arm. Terrified, he tugged on the larva, trying to make it come free. It lashed angrily, spinning silk, threatening to bite him with little teeth too. It didn't want to come out of his arm. It wanted to stay there, anchored in his arm, and build itself a silken case. "Karen, Rick," he said softly. The door to the alcove was closed. They didn't hear him. They couldn't help him anyway. Oh, he stifled a moan of panic. What about that video screen in the next room? Rourke had said it was a communication system that connected with Nanogen. He glanced around. Rick and Karen were in the magnet room, a distance away. Rourke was in the hangar. He threw the blanket off, got up, and went into the communications room, where he inspected the video screen. He found a lens. It was a minicam pointed in front of the screen. And there was a cupboard at the base of the screen. He flipped it open. He flipped open the cover and discovered a power switch and a red button marked Link. Simple enough. He pushed the power button, and in a moment the screen powered up, glowing blue. Then he pushed the red button Link. Almost immediately, a female voice came on, but the screen remained blank. Nanogen Security Services, where are you calling from? Tantalus, somebody help me. Sir, who are you? What is your situation? I'm Daniel Manat. Abruptly, the screen showed the woman's face. She had a smooth, professional appearance. Put me through to Van Drake, please, he said to the woman. It's late at night, sir. It's an emergency. Tell him I'm at Tantalus and I need help.